January 2000. The world is still here. I was certain that it was all going to end with Y2K, but it seems like maybe people were upset about something that really wasn't that important. Who knows? But the world survived. I only read 4 books in January of 2000. I was probably recovering from all that stress on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, expecting the end of the world. But I did have a little time for reading. And what I read was, first, Paint It Black. That was horrible, horrible segue. The first book I read in January of 2000 was Paint It Black by Nancy A. Collins. This is a Sonia Blue novel. Sonia is a half vampire, half human anti-hero, fighting bad guys, fighting monsters, but she needs blood. She's part vampire. And in this book, she's just doing her thing. I really couldn't find a detailed description. I don't remember the details of this story. But it's Nancy Collins. It's Sonia Blue. I enjoyed these books. Very exciting because there's a new Sonia Blue story coming out soon in an anthology that I backed on Kickstarter. Dead Detectives Society. Which, of course, I will read and review. But Paint It Black, Nancy A. Collins. Paint It Black is also really the only Rolling Stones song that I like. But I recommend it. You should read all the Sonia Blue stuff. Next up, we have Storm Riders by Ed Gorman. And this book, this is one of his westerns, and it's about a U.S. Marshal. I gotta check my notes. A U.S. Marshal named Earl Conlon. And he's heading out to exonerate. Is that the correct word? This outlaw, Billy Pecos. And on his way there, he witnesses a murder that causes all sorts of trouble. Basically, this is a story about Billy Pecos is really Billy the Kid. And there's a range war going on, which is essentially the Lincoln County War. So it's a fictional version of actual historic events. But as I said with Nancy A. Collins, this is Ed Gorman. He's a great writer. It's a good Western. But then I moved on to the penultimate book already. Look at that. I'm less than 3 minutes in. I'm on the penultimate book. The Splendor Falls, edited by Aaron E. Kelly. This is from White Wolf Publishing. It's another anthology, this time for their game Changeling the Dreaming. And I'm going to look back to see which month it was. Where I read, in November, I read the Werewolf, the Apocalypse anthology, the Wraith anthology, and the Mage anthology. And this is the Changeling anthology. So, in the Changeling world, it's basically a bunch of people, I believe, who are half human and half fae. And so they tend to be people in the artistic world because they need to they're trying to avoid the banality which weakens them. It's anti-fae, the banal world. So they're trying to be creatives or artists, things like that, to absorb something that I cannot remember what it's called now. And meanwhile, maybe they can eventually get back to the dreaming, which is the Fey world. As with all the White Wolf stuff, if you were playing the game, you would choose I don't know what they're called here. You've got factions and tribes and different things, or what they're called in the other White Wolf games. But essentially your character traits, the group that you would belong to. So you're going to see all of that in these stories. But just to name a few of the authors, you've got Philip Nutman, Gary A. Braunbeck, Nancy Holder, and a story co-written by Ed Gorman. It's like we were just talking about him. So if you're into the White Wolf stuff, if you're into sort of fairy tale or fairy fae stories, even if you're not into the White Wolf stuff, it's still, I think, pretty interesting. And then finally, the last book that I read in January of 2000. Can't believe we survived. Sick Puppy by Carl Hyacin. This is eco-terrorist Tilly Spree. He's our good guy. And he's wants to save the toads on Toad Island. And of course, it's a Carl Hyacin book, so he's going to run into all sorts of zany characters. There's going to be crime. There's going to be craziness. You've got a used car salesman who's now the governor, a hooker. Excuse me. That's what it says in the description. A sex worker who only services Republicans. Characters like this abound in Sick Puppy by Carl Hyacin. If you like comedic crime, Carl Hyacin isn't going to steer you wrong, I think. But that's it. That is all that I read in January of 2000. Looking ahead, I can already see it looks like 8 things in February, many more than that in March. So I was just reading to celebrate life since the world didn't end. So that's all. That's all I've got. As usual, didn't bother to think of a question ahead of time. So, how about this? What genre? This is a lame question. I'm gonna tell you right now. This is a lame question. What genre mixes best with comedy? My answer, of course, is going to be horror comedy. I love a good horror comedy, whether it's a book or a movie. You've got Jeff Strand, a master at the comedic horror. You've got movies like Shaun of the Dead. I just watched both Cocaine Bear and Renfield recently, which I thought both of those were absolutely hilarious. I know there's other authors that write funny horror stuff. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. But, I like something that's going to make me laugh. Science fiction works well if you have the right author, of course, Douglas Adams. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I still say is the funniest book I've ever read. But Jeff Strand's novelization Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is up there. Good Omens, I thought was hilarious. I need to reread that. See if it's as funny as I remember. So fantasy works well. I've read a lot of funny fantasy, science fiction, but horror would be my choice. And crime comedy works well in the movies with the right author. It can work very well. Donald Westlake wrote some hilarious crime novels. Also wrote some very serious crime novels under the name Richard Stark. But I'm going with horror, of course. I think that's always going to be my go-to if we're talking about mixing genres. But what about you? Do you like comedy mixed into your other genres? Do you want to read a comedy version of Lord of the Rings? You want to read a comedy version of The Stand? Could you do a comedy version of The Stand? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you care to follow me on other social media, I am still, as of this recording, on Twitter at Ronin5757. On Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, It's Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. And if you're on Blue Sky, I am at EL Smith. That's all I've got for you this week. So until next week, read more books.